I had a perfect first pregnancy. I walked into a hospital in labor after 9 months of pure bliss, so excited to finally bring home our baby girl. She was our first daughter, the first grandchild on both sides of our family, and she was so loved and anticipated. The doctors had called everything about my pregnancy textbook. I'd read all the books, followed all the rules, and Alana and I were the picture of health. But I walked into the hospital that day, just 2 days before her due date, only to be blindsided with the news that her heart had inexplicably stopped beating. We delivered her lifeless body, perfect, beautiful, except for the one thing that really mattered. We kissed her dark hair and told her how much we love her. And then somehow I walked out of that hospital with empty arms, and we drove home alone, her brand new car seat rattling empty in the back. I soon learned that the most heartbreaking part about this story is that it's not at all uncommon. 65 families every single day in the United States lose a baby to stillbirth. But nobody's talking about stillbirth. No one's talking about stillbirth, and no one's giving families the chance to make sure that everything possible is done to get their baby home safe. There are 23,000 families that lose a child to stillbirth every year, and most of them never knew that it could happen until it happened to them. Research and the efforts of our international peers show that we should be able to cut this number in half if we make it a priority. Did you know that when it comes to the average rate of reduction of stillbirth, the US ranks 48th out of 49 high-income countries, and 183rd out of all low, middle, and high-income countries in the world that report stillbirth rates? The families who launched Push for Empowered Pregnancy with me 1 year ago came together to take action and ensure that no other parent goes without this empowering information that we wish we had been told. We came together to make sure that no family has to live with the devastating what-ifs that we do. We'll never be able to prevent every stillbirth, but every family who suffers a loss deserves to know that they and their providers did everything possible to give their child the best possible chance. We have to do better because the silence surrounding stillbirth is lethal. Families deserve to know that stillbirth still happens, that it happens even in healthy, low-risk pregnancies like mine. Our babies who were born still count. My daughter, Alana, still counts. And if you are the 1 in 170 expected families who've been decimated by stillbirth, we want you to know that your baby still counts too. And you can make a difference. Help us call for change. We are our children's voices. Providers, you are our children's champions. Together, we can end preventable stillbirth. We just have to care enough to try. United we push, for families, for babies, for change. Thank you.
So today I'm going to be talking about estimated placental volume. Saving a life as easy as 1, 2, 3. I think to understand the significance of the placenta and why it's so important in pregnancy, one has to remember that the placenta is part of the fetus. In essence, the placenta is like the root system of the tree. The tree totally depends for its life and nutrients through the roots, and so the fetus depends completely on its placenta. If we were to cut 2/3 of the root system out of this tree, this would be a serious problem for the tree. And likewise, if a fetus has a very small placenta, but remains itself very large, it is a significant mismatch, and this is a significant cause for stillbirth, as I'll show you in a second. In one of our studies where we looked at almost 300 third trimester stillbirth cases, a small placenta was the #1 cause of stillbirth, up to 36%. So clearly, a small placenta is a critical thing that we need to pay attention to in terms of stillbirth. Obviously, there are other causes as I list here, but a small placenta is the #1 cause. I'd like to make this more tangible and real for you and present a typical, sadly, very typical case, which I'm going to say is Jane Doe here. Jane was 34 years old at the time of this 4th pregnancy. It was her 4th pregnancy. She had 3 previous deliveries, 3 normal living children. Everything was uneventful in those previous pregnancies, and everything was uneventful in this 4th pregnancy. During her normal anatomy scan, everything was reassuring. They looked at the size of the fetus and said, everything is great. At 39 weeks and 0 days, a week before her due date, there was a dot tone, basically a handheld ultrasound, was applied to her abdomen, and the heart rate was completely normal, and she felt completely reassured at this point. However, 1 day before her due date, at 39 weeks and 6 days, she felt a decrease in fetal movement. And she hadn't experienced that before, so she wasn't really sure what to make of it. And eventually she did call her provider. She went into the hospital, and unfortunately, by that evening, when she went into the hospital, she was diagnosed with a stillbirth, which is a terrible tragedy, as we've heard from so many people so far. Now, when she delivered her son, what was remarkable to everybody is he was large. He was at the 75th percentile in terms of his weight. However, his placenta, and remember, it's his placenta, was less than the 3rd percentile. In fact, this was so small that the hospital where Jane delivered really doubted whether this was his placenta. But I want to assure you that this was really his placenta. Now, one of the ways that we can assess this misbalance between the size, the birth weight, and the size of the stillborn's placenta is to do what's called a fetal to placental weight ratio. The normal ratio is 6:1. Normally, a newborn baby is 6 times heavier than its placenta. In Jane's case, her son was 10.1 times larger. This is an extremely abnormal number. Another way of looking at it is looking at percentiles. The fetal percentile, which I just told you was at the 75th percentile, divided by the placenta percentile 3, was almost 30:1. Normal, it should be 1:1. So this is very critically abnormal, and was part of the reason that the OBs really didn't think that there was a problem. So the question is, why didn't the OB know that the placenta was so small? Clearly, they knew that the baby was a very large size, but they didn't know the placenta was so small. And the reason is that currently, in clinical practice in obstetrics and maternal fetal medicine, the focus is on the fetus, and that's great. Of course, we're all looking for a healthy baby, but my contention is that not knowing the size of the placenta is like driving a car without a gas gauge. If you don't have a gas gauge, a minute before you run out of gas, the car runs perfectly normally, then all of a sudden it stops. And that's what these stillbirth cases are like. Now, am I the only person or the first person to observe this? Absolutely not. This has been seen for many decades, actually. One of the very important studies that was published in 2012 by Jen Hutchian, a beautiful study published in Obstetrics and Gynecology, showed that if you look at what's called placental weight Z-scores, and just think of these as standard deviations, 0 is the mean, -1 means 1 standard deviation less in weight, -2 is 2 standard deviations. You can see as the placenta gets smaller and smaller, the risk and probability for stillbirth increases. And what she pointed out is that this is independent of the size of the newborn baby. Stillbirths occur with normal or large size fetuses. One other example, which was published by the Stillbirth Collaborative Research Network, a very large institutional study. You can see how many authors are on this study. They showed, it concluded that the #1 cause for stillbirth and preventable stillbirth is related to what they call placental insufficiency, which is another name for a small placenta. And they said that management of placental insufficiency or small placentas may have the most immediate effect on stillbirth reduction. So the practical question is, can we measure the size of the placenta? As we do, we estimate estimated fetal weight now. Now, for a long time, it's been difficult. It was difficult to measure the placenta. Here's an ultrasound at 18 weeks, a cross section of the placenta. And people said, this is a very weird shape. And so it's difficult to measure it. However, with the help of my father, who's a mathematician, and my interest in this, we developed something called estimated placental volume. It is a simple, free way of looking at the placental volume. It can be performed with very basic ultrasounds, even handheld ultrasound devices. And the equation for this can be incorporated into the ultrasound machines. And I want to show you, as the title implies, how easy this is. So again, this is a normal patient at 18 weeks. Step 1 is to take the tip to the tip and get the width of the placental measurement here. Here again is a cross section of the placenta. Start at the apex at the topmost point of this curve, drop down. This is the height of the placenta. Follow the same line. This is the thickness of the placenta. Take those numbers, stick it into the equation that my father developed, and voila, you have the volume. In this case, 251 cubic centimeters. Now, how easy is this to do? Well, it is so easy that in October of 2019, when I was at a meeting, I met this young woman who was selling ultrasound machines. I asked her, do you know about EPV? She said, no. I explained what it is. She says, well, let me see how easy this is. And she happened to be 20 weeks pregnant. She lifted up her shirt, put the probe on her abdomen, and here's the picture of her baby's placenta. You can see again the width, the height, and the thickness. And I used my calculator and figured that her baby's placenta was at the 80th percentile. So what does one do? One of the questions we get often about EPV is, what do we do if the placenta is small? And I'd like to share with you a basic concept in medicine that we call risk stratification. If a test comes back abnormal, we stratify that patient to more follow-up. So in the case of a small placenta, what I'd recommend to the caregivers of these women is follow the fetal to placental weight ratio. Let's make sure that we don't get a bad ratio there. The next thing is teach these patients how to do kick counts. PUSH has alliances with 2 organizations I've shown here, Project Alive and Kicking and Count the Kicks. Teach these patients how to follow their babies and make sure that things aren't changing. And probably the most important message, if a woman feels that there's any significant change in their pregnancy, just go to labor and delivery triage and tell them that you're concerned. Let them look at you and don't leave until you're satisfied. So in summary, since the #1 cause of stillbirth is a small placenta, tracking placental size is the simplest way to prevent stillbirths due to a small placenta. I'd like to acknowledge the people that helped me with the paper that is being reviewed now for publication, my father, who we named the EPV calculator after, and my other colleagues who developed this. And I'll just leave this slide on for a minute. More information about all this work can be found at my Yale website at klimanlabs.yale.edu. And please feel free to email me directly at harvey.kliman@yale.edu if you have any questions. Personally, if you're a physician or patient, I'll be happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.